For fast breakouts in breaststroke, swimmers have to execute the same basic skills as in every other stroke. They have to create as much propulsion as possible, and they have to create as little resistance as possible to maintain as much speed as possible. But in breaststroke, it's a whole lot harder to make that happen. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. There are two unique challenges in breaststroke that make breakouts significantly more difficult. First, there's not continuous propulsion from the legs as there is in freestyle, backstroke, and butterfly. There's only one leg kick instead of continuous leg kicking. Second, swimmers have to recover both their arms and their legs forward under the water, which is going to create a ton of resistance. And so compared to the other strokes, breaststrokers are going to slow down a whole lot more, whereas in freestyle, backstroke, and butterfly, swimmers can pretty much maintain their speed into the breakout. In breaststroke, swimmers are going to lose most of their speed because of those recoveries. And when it comes to minimizing resistance, breaststrokers are also going to breathe on that first stroke. They tend to come up relatively high compared to the other strokes, and that's going to make it a lot more difficult to keep resistance low because they're going to have to take a more vertical path, and that's going to make it more difficult to get into their horizontal swimming as smoothly as possible. So relative to the other strokes, if breaststrokers want to execute great breakouts, they're going to have to find ways to keep resistance really, really low, and they're going to have to transition into their swimming as smoothly as possible. Let's check it out. In this video, we're not going to focus on the pullouts themselves. We're going to focus more on the transition to the surface after the pullout and the recoveries of the arms and the legs as swimmers get into the stroke on the surface. So the first thing to pay attention to is that swimmers are going to have to recover their arms in a way that keeps resistance as absolutely low as possible. So keeping the arms as close to the body as possible is going to help create as little resistance as possible. So even here, we're going to see it's going to slow him down a little bit no matter what he does to recover the arms, because that's pushing resistance against the flow of the water, against the direction of travel, and that's going to slow him down. And so as much as possible, swimmers are going to want to find an arm path that keeps the hands, the arms within the shadow of the body as much as possible, staying as close as they can, keeping everything as tight as they can. This swimmer is choosing to go the hands straight up the body and then the elbows out to the side. That's one strategy. Some swimmers will cross their arms underneath. That can also be effective. The idea here is that everything has to be as close to the body. You don't want things pointing out to the side. You don't want things dropping down deeper in the water. The more swimmers can keep everything as close as possible, everything as tight as possible, from once he starts to bring things up all the way until his hands pass his face, he's getting right into a line there. Everything's trying to stay in line as much as possible. And so the more swimmers can keep everything really close, the more effective they're going to be at keeping resistance low. Next piece of it is, other than recovering the arms, if we watch the recovery of the legs, again, the thighs are going to drop forward to some extent. That's like putting on the brakes too. So we've already created a lot of resistance moving the arms forward. There's also going to be a lot of resistance by moving the legs forward and recovering them. But again, both these movements are necessary. The arms need to get out in front to set up the next stroke. The legs need to move up in order to generate a kick, to create propulsion, to get the swimmer to the surface. So these things are necessary. For the legs in particular, what's really important is moving really, really quickly, getting out of that position really quickly. One, so that swimmers can create propulsion again, but two, this is not a position that they want to stay in. It's going to create a lot of resistance almost no matter what swimmers do, so they have to be really good with recovering quickly, getting the feet up fast once they decide to go, so not much movement, and then boom, getting it up, and then slamming it right back down to get out of that position. And so the more swimmers can execute that skill quickly, and the more propulsion that they can create when actually executing the kick, the better off they're going to be. So before the swimmer has even reached the surface, they have to navigate those two obstacles, recovering the arms, recovering the legs, and keeping resistance as low as possible, because the more resistance that they create, the slower that they're going to go. If you have the technology to measure instantaneous speed, it's actually pretty crazy how slow swimmers will actually go in this position. They almost come to a stop in some cases. In some cases, they do come to a stop because of how much resistance they create. Now, that loss of speed is just instantaneous, but when that happens, swimmers have to get back up to speed once they execute the kick here and once they start to execute the next stroke on the surface. So the more that swimmers can prevent the loss of speed, the faster they're going to go. So it's not so much about creating as much speed into the breakout, it's about trying to lose as little speed as possible. And so once the swimmers get up to the surface, you can see everything's in a pretty straight line. If swimmers are really vertical at that point, it's going to make it much more difficult to get into the stroke because ultimately they have to be horizontal in the water. So this swimmer is doing a pretty good job of staying level. And then when he takes his first stroke, he does have to come up to breathe, and typically that could let his hips drop. But if we see this swimmer here, he's doing a really good job. His hips are right up at the surface when he takes that first stroke. And a lot of swimmers can run into trouble when they execute their actual breakout. When they come up, they may only get to this position or something like that where the hips are really low and they haven't reached the surface of the water in addition to the upper body. And that can make it very difficult to get into the actual breaststroke swimming. And of course, if swimmers are moving through the water with their hips low, that's going to create a lot more resistance. And even if they're creating a lot of propulsion, that is going to slow them down because both need to be there. We need to create as much propulsion as possible and as little resistance as possible. And so the last piece of the breakout is swimmers need to execute the actual breakout in a way where the upper body is moving forward, not just up. And that's going to allow the hips to get up to the surface and stay up at the surface. And now he's into his stroke. And this stroke, it's right here, is pretty much indistinguishable from what we would see 30 meters down the pool. So again, recovering the arms as tight to the body as possible. And so swimmers may have to experiment as to what allows them to do that as effectively as possible. There's two kind of big options. One is sliding kind of the hands right up the side of the body like this swimmer is doing. The benefit is that the hands are going to be a little bit closer to the body. His could probably be a little bit closer. The drawback is the elbows are going to be out to the side. The alternative is to cross the arms under the body. In that case, the hands are going to be a little bit further away from the body, but the elbows are going to be tighter. Kind of trade-offs there. There's no way to get the best of both worlds. Regardless, swimmers have to keep it tight and they have to move quickly through that phase in order to get into a more streamlined position. And the same thing with the legs. They got to come up fast once swimmers decide to go, and they got to get out of that position fast in order to minimize the loss of speed and then get back the speed they lost by executing a great kick. Coming up to the surface, breaking forward rather than just straight up, and finding ways to get the hips up to the surface and then have the upper body moving forward so that swimmers can get into the first stroke as quickly as possible. So in concept, not particularly difficult, relatively simple, recover with as little resistance as possible, break out so that the body is level at the surface once swimmers get into their first stroke, and that's going to help swimmers maintain as much speed as possible. It's not so much about creating a ton of propulsion, it's about finding ways to limit the amount of resistance that's created to limit the amount of speed that's lost. So if we watch another swimmer here, we're going to see the same basic skills executed here. She's going to recover the arms a little bit different. She's sliding right up the side of the body here. She's keeping the hands really tight to the body. As you can see, the elbows are going to be a little bit wider. That's kind of the trade-off. She's doing a really good job of keeping the hands tight, and she's moving very quickly. She's really throwing the hands up in front of her head, in front of her face as quickly as she can. And then when we watch the legs here, she's doing a good job of not letting the hips drop down really low. And she's also doing a really good job of not letting the knees drop really low. We can see from the front view here, she's not creating a ton of surface area with the front of her thighs. And so she's doing a really good job of minimizing the amount of resistance that she's creating. And two, she's getting into that position and out of that position really quickly. And if we watch the breakout itself here, she's doing a really good job of keeping the head low. And then when she takes that first stroke, hips are right up at the surface. And then she's boom, she's right into the next stroke cycle. And then she's on her way on the surface. And so same dynamics here, keeping resistance as low as possible with the recoveries. This swimmer's got the hands out a little bit wider. She's keeping it really tight to the body, and she's bringing them all the way up to her shoulders and then reaching forward. And so a little bit different strategy. She gets everything into alignment there. And then also with the legs, keeping resistance low. The kick is happening really fast. She's not creating a lot of resistance with her legs. And then boom, she's up at the surface, hips are up at the surface, and then she's moving everything forward down the pool. So the same skills here. Keep resistance as low as possible with effective arm recoveries. They need to be as streamlined as possible. They need to be as fast as possible. And then the same thing with the kick, recover fast, get out of position fast. And if swimmers have to decide whether they're going to take this big giant kick that creates a ton of propulsion, but also a ton of resistance, they're probably better off with a smaller kick that happens faster, that doesn't create as much resistance. They're probably going to create more resistance than they do propulsion, especially in that position if they try to execute a really big, really powerful, really strong kick. Not so much easy to do, but simple in concept. Keep resistance low throughout the entire time. Get into the surface swimming, get into the body position that they want to be in, get the hips up at the surface through the breakout so that swimmers are in position to swim well on the surface. throughout the rest of the lap. Another view purely from the side, what we're going to see, the swimmer is going to bring their hands up their body, keeping tight. They're going to go both hands right up the center, elbows out to the side, and they're going to keep everything tight, and they're going to move through that quickly. And then we're going to see the same thing with the kick here. Feet are moving fast, not creating a ton of resistance with the legs, creating as little resistance as possible, and then moving out of that position as quickly as possible, coming up to the surface level, and then getting into the stroke right away. The hips are up at the surface, and then they're back into their swimming, and they're into their swimming that's indistinguishable from the rest of the lap. So just like the other swimmers, the key here is creating as little resistance as possible when recovering the arms, when recovering the legs, getting through those positions really, really fast, and then getting into a breaststroke line before the first stroke so that they're already in position to execute great breaststroke. They don't have to break out and then try to find the positions that they want to execute when they actually swim. And that first stroke is going to look very much like what the second stroke will be like. So they're already in position once they get to the surface, and that's another key aspect, is they're not going to waste any time transitioning to their surface swimming because they're already in position to get there. And so they're going to finish with a great line here, just like the line that they would use when they're already on the surface. So really fast recoveries with the arms and the legs, keeping everything really tight to the body with the upper body, moving the legs quickly, getting out of those positions as fast as possible, and then breaking out in a way where the hips are up at the surface, everything's in line so that the transition to the surface swimming can be as smooth as possible with as little resistance as possible, which is going to maintain as much speed as possible. If you want to learn more about how to execute the pullout, the key skill before the breakout, check out the video below.